The rain pounded relentlessly as Chief Okon Emmanuel was laid to rest. Family members lined the graveside, faces masked with grief, yet tension simmered beneath the surface. Whispers about inheritance traveled among the mourners, slicing through the sound of the storm. Madame Felicia stood upright beside her grown children, David, Rose, and Daniel, who had flown in from different corners of the globe. Their expressions were a mixture of sorrow and anticipation. On the opposite side, Madame Grace clung to her teenage son, George. The mother and son appeared isolated, carrying silent resolve amid their loss. The murmurs around them grew louder. "Who inherits the chief's fortune?" someone whispered. Another replied, "Surely Felicia's children. Everyone knows the second wife won't get a thing." Grace overheard, but chose silence over confrontation. George, too, remained quiet, though the words carved deeply into his young heart, leaving behind a cold determination. A week passed before the family gathered for the reading of the will. Inside the dimly lit study, the lawyer's hesitant voice trembled as he read aloud Chief Okon's final wishes. The will favored Felicia's children entirely, allotting them every property, business, and asset. Grace and George were absent from the list, not even mentioned in passing. David turned to Grace with a dismissive tone. "It's tradition, Auntie Grace. Father's wishes must be honored." Grace nodded faintly. With quiet dignity, she and her son walked out of the mansion that had once been their home. Later that night, in their small rented room, she spoke softly to her son. "Life won't always be fair, my child, but don't waste your strength in anger. Build your own path. One day, they'll remember you not for what you lost, but for what you became." The years that followed were hard. Grace sewed clothes for neighbors to keep them alive, while George studied under the dim light of a candle, teaching himself coding from borrowed textbooks and old phones. His dream, an app to connect small African businesses to customers, began to take form. He called it LinkBridge. Few believed in him. "Who will invest in you?" they mocked. "A boy from nothing?" Then tragedy struck again. Grace fell ill, and George, desperate, sold his only computer to pay hospital bills. Before she passed, she took his hand and said with a fading voice, "Never stop building, my son. Even when no one believes in you, believe in yourself." At her graveside, George stood in silence, his jaw tight with grief and resolve. "I'll make you proud, Mama," he whispered. "I'll build something that carries your name forever." Time and persistence worked their quiet magic. A European investor discovered his work online and saw potential where others had not. The investment came through. LinkBridge launched and quickly became a sensation, revolutionizing trade and logistics across Africa. Headlines celebrated him. "Young Nigerian tech genius disrupts the market." George Okon's startup becomes Africa's newest unicorn. George became the face of innovation, respected, admired, envied. Yet, behind every award and applause lingered the shadow of rejection. He had built everything from nothing, but the memory of being disowned remained buried in the quiet corners of his heart. Then one evening, the past came knocking. His lawyer called with news that made his pulse freeze. "Sir, your late father's estate is under debt investigation. The bank plans to seize the properties." Chief Okon had died, leaving enormous debts. The lands, companies, and family homes, all were on the verge of foreclosure. Soon after, George received another call, this time from his estranged siblings. They came to him, humbled, faces worn with fear. At the entrance of his glass tower office, the receptionist asked, "Do you have an appointment?" David cleared his throat. "Tell him his family is here." In the boardroom, they sat across from George, who listened silently as they pleaded. "George, please, we were wrong," Rose said, her voice cracking. "They're taking everything. You're our only hope." He studied them quietly. Their faces were older now, their pride gone. His mind flashed back to the day he and his mother were turned away. Yet, after a long pause, he said, "You took everything from me, but I won't repay pain with pain. I'll save the family estate. Not for you, but for the man we all called father." Days later, newspapers carried the story. Tech billionaire George Okon clears father's debts. When asked by journalists why he chose to help those who had once rejected him, he smiled faintly. Because forgiveness is freedom. Some debts aren't paid with money. They're settled with mercy. But fate had one final twist. Weeks later, the family lawyer met with the siblings again. According to property law, he explained, since Mr. George Okon repaid the debts and redeemed the estate in his name, he now holds full ownership of all properties. A stunned silence followed. Rose gasped. "So everything belongs to him now?" The lawyer nodded. "Everything." George entered the room quietly. His voice was calm, his presence commanding. "I didn't plan this for revenge. I did it to close a wound that started years ago. But life has a way of balancing its own scales." Returning to the family mansion, George walked through the hall where once he had been unwelcome. He found the old family portrait still hanging on the wall. His mother's face had been removed long ago. With steady hands, he replaced it with a new picture, one of him and Grace, smiling. "We're home now, Mama," he whispered. Sunlight broke through the window, bathing the walls in gold. It was more than victory. It was peace. The world saw headlines about property and wealth. But those who knew the story understood it was never about inheritance. It was about resilience, forgiveness, and the strength to rebuild from ashes.